Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Spiritism Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm very happy to host this live talk today by Joaquim Eleuterio, who will be talking about the keys to happiness on earth. Let's all give Joaquin a very warm welcome. And before he starts his presentation, allow me to introduce him. Joaquim Eleuterio is a member of Neecafla, a Spiritist center in Brussels, Belgium, where he teaches courses on Spiritism principles and works as a medium. He is also a lecturer on Spiritist topics. He graduated in economics and business administration from New York University. He also has a Master's of Arts degree in business administration and management from Boston University. In addition, he has a Master of Arts degree in international relations from the Free University in Brussels. He is also a classically trained musician and a U.S. Army veteran. Please take this opportunity to send your questions during the presentation using the chat window. Joaquin has reserved time to address your comments and questions once he concludes his presentation. Hi, Joaquin. It's nice to have you here.
Hi, Peter. Nice to be here.
Great.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
So I can start. Okay. First of all, before I start, I'd like to give you a disclaimer. I'm an incarnate spirit, so if I had a recipe for true happiness on earth, I would be extremely happy, in fact. The idea here is that I'm going to try to give you some suggestions as how you can be happier here while we're here. So let's start. Let's talk about the quest. The quest is an external voyage. This voyage started when we were created by God as a spark of God, and it will continue until we reach a proximity of God while we learn and while we develop our spirits and our morality. There is also an internal voyage. That is, we need to learn who we are as spirits. We need to travel within ourselves in order to know how we behave and why we behave a certain way. And these two voyages happen at the same time. And the internal voyage actually supports the external voyage. The external voyage is obviously comprised of various incarnations and various periods in the spiritual dimension. The objective of the external voyage, of the final voyage, is the proximity of God, where we will be in a divine world, where matter would not exist anymore, things would not exist anymore, where we become pure spirits, where we would be near Christ, and there would be absolute happiness. And absolute happiness in this world, divine world, is there for us. And this is what we are striving for along the way, along this long voyage, supported also by this internal voyage where we try to learn who we are and in order to better ourselves spiritually and morally. Let's talk about happiness and sadness. The earth is a world of atonement and trials, as we all know, and absolute happiness is impossible on earth. It can be temporary, like we see here in this photograph. You know, people are smiling, like we see in a lot of the social networks. Everybody's always smiling in social networks. You very seldom see a sad face, but it's temporary. And it also unstable, and coexistent without, there are periods where you have happiness and sadness coexisting. As you can see here on this photograph on the right, you have dark clouds, and at the same time, you have a beautiful rainbow. So this is just to illustrate that we live in a world where these things can happen. For example, a few years ago, I went to visit my family in London. And while I was there, I was very happy because I was seeing them. I was seeing my grandchildren. And all of a sudden, I had a really big, bad problem in my back. Okay, very simple thing, but I was not happy with that. But at the same time, I was happy seeing my family. So we see that every day in our lives, where we go through periods where, okay, happiness and sadness alternate, and sometimes it happens at the same time. So we have to recognize that we cannot have happiness forever for all of our physical life here on earth. Sometimes, there are people who see life in black and white. They have a tendency to see everything in these stark colors. But in fact, they may be depressed. And it's very difficult to escape depression, by the way, because, there's this vortex here and it can take you. It's also very difficult for the people around them, the family and so on, the loved ones, to help them because they are taken into this vortex. And you have to also be careful that you're not taken yourself when you live with someone in depression. Obviously, depression is a very deep, very complicated topic, and we cannot address it today, but we can go through periods of depression. We can go through periods where we see life only in black and white terms. But at the same time, we should concentrate on the sunny side of the street. When we live on earth, there are periods, as I said, where it's dark and there is also light. So one of the things that we should try to do is to concentrate on the sunny side of the street, not just staying in the dark. But what are the sources of sadness? Selfishness, pride. We think we are better than people. And the smallest attack on our pride, we get very upset about it. A hatred, our heart is full sometimes of anger, of hatred towards somebody who has done us wrong, for example. Desires, unfulfilled desires, passions which are not balanced, unbalanced passions, fears as well, because when we fear, we sometimes become sad. We fear, for example, about the future, what's going to happen to us, how I'm going to deal with a problem like this, an illness, for example, how I'm going to deal with it, how I'm going to deal with getting old, how I'm going to deal with having children and educating them, how I'm going to deal with the fact that this is a very tough world for young people. So fears can also make us sad. And obviously obsessions. We can be obsessed not only by things that we are doing, we may be obsessed by our jobs, we may be obsessed by something that we love, for example, like music, like work, to the detriment of everything around us. So this is also an unbalanced obsession. But also obsession can come from the spiritual world. We can be obsessed by a spirit that doesn't like us. Maybe it was an enemy that we acquired in a past life. Sickness is also a source of sadness. Sickness is something that sooner or later all of us are going to have to deal with. And I can assure you that we can be happy even during sickness. We can be happy. We just have to try and work on it, etc. What are the origins? The past, particularly the past, our periods in the spiritual dimension, our previous incarnations, our current incarnate life. For example, if we have had a trauma in this incarnation, that may reflect on the way we behave later on, because we will be dealing with that. And sometimes, we have trauma and we put it away somewhere in our unconscious, for example, but it's still there, and sometimes it's doing a lot of damage to us. And also the sufferings that we made in previous incarnations, or the suffering that we made other people feel in other incarnations, and that created some guilt. Sometimes we arrive at an incarnation, we are full of guilt. We are spirits which have guilt. So we are here sometimes to try to solve this guilt, to deal with it. As you can see here, there are many walks in the forests of life. Each incarnation, there is a structure where you see here, for example, on the left, you see trees, you see a way, a path that's going more or less straight. You cannot go through the trees, but you can choose, for example, to go on the left, to walk on the grass instead of walking on the path. These are the choices that you have. On the right here, you have a more difficult walk through the forest, where you see a small stream here on the right, but there's a rock here. You have to go through that. It's a little bit more difficult than one on the left. But this is the way one can look at and think of a particular incarnation, because there are structures which are there. They are pre-programmed, if you like, and we have to sort of deal with it, go around it, go over it, cross it, and so on. So this is what sometimes creates problems for us, because we have to, how do we climb this rock? How do we cross that river? And so on. The causes. Mainly it's our bad choices, because there is, in Spiritism, we don't consider that there is sin. There are just bad choices. We made mistakes, but we are responsible for our choices. We are always responsible for our choices. We cannot blame anybody else but ourselves for the wrong choice that we have made. If you come to a fork on the road and you decide to go left or you go right, it's your choice to do it. Sometimes we know what we should do, but we do the wrong thing anyway. Why? Well, it depends on the person. It depends on his or her unconscious, how much coherent they are. Sometimes we know by reading books, by reading the gospel, what we really should be doing. But anyway, we're still doing it wrong. And this is something that we have to discover, why we are doing this, why we are taking these wrong steps, why we are being incoherent in relation to what we know. So again, we are responsible for our choices. What are the consequences? Well, if you make a mistake, there will be consequences. You would have to compensate for that mistake. In the present, obviously, in the present life, maybe if you hurt somebody in the past, in this life, you can demand ask him to pardon you, for example, or you can have a conversation with them and air your positions. So this is really something that you can do now. Every day we can do this. Every day we can ask for forgiveness from people. Every day we can work to minimize the hurt that we are causing people, that we have caused people. We also sometimes have to do compensations in the future, in a future incarnation, for example, if we cannot do it in the future of this present incarnation. So this is what we have. And sometimes we also have to compensate and find a solution in the spiritual dimension. This is particularly true of people, for example, who have done us wrong. and that we carry this boulder on our shoulder about these people. If, for example, you have a parent that was not perfect, that caused you a problem, and for some reason or another, you were unable to forgive them. Sometimes when they go to the other side of the mirror, the only way that you can find a solution, that you can find forgiveness, is through prayer. Sometimes there are communications that you can have in a mediumship meeting, but this is very, very rare. But most of the time, you can communicate with them through prayer. You can also do it through dreams. For example, I had an issue with my father. My father was a very tough guy, very, very tough. He was a Brazilian, but he smiled about once a year around November or December. And he instilled in his children, principally the male children, that we had to be tough. The world is difficult out there and you have to be tough. So we had a very complicated relationship. And obviously when he passed away, I still had these problems with him. But many years later, I was still feeling the difficulties that I had with him. When I used to see, for example, a boy walking next to his father, and the father was, talking to him or communicating with him in love and caressing his hair and so on and so forth, I felt bad because my father never did that. He was a very cold person. But one day, after a lot of reflection, I had a dream with him. And in the dream, we came to an agreement. We came to forgiveness. So it can happen also in the spiritual dimension. I believe that was a dream that happened to me in the spiritual dimension. So it can happen. And obviously in other incarnations in the future. You can also find compensations there. Free will. Now, this photograph shows a balloon. Now, a balloon allows you to make choices, right? You can put more fuel into the balloon. You can let out weights, and you can try to govern. But sometimes there is a wind, and the wind will take you where you don't want to go. So free will allows us to choose, but it doesn't mean that it will always take us where we want to go. And every time we arrive on an incarnation, we arrive with what's called luggage. And we have a lot of luggage from previous lives. And here in the picture, I said a lot of old luggage, but you arrive with that. And sometimes you also have luggage on departure because you were not able to find love, to compensate for the errors that you made, and you were not able to find to pardon people and so on and so forth. So you still have luggage when you leave. And sometimes you also add luggage to the luggage that you already brought in. And at each step of a particular incarnation, we have certain spiritual states. When we arrive in a particular incarnation, as a baby, we have a spiritual state. Those of us who have had more than one child know that each one has already sort of a biological spiritual personality. One of my daughters, for example, she was always sharing things, always sharing from the time she was a baby. The other one, well, what's mine is mine, what's yours we share. So I love them both, but they're different. And all of us have that. And our spiritual state are dynamic. They change each and every day as we learn, as we study, as we suffer. And some of us, unfortunately, don't like the spiritual states that we arrive with. And in tragic cases, they will probably be their own worst enemy throughout life. And this is why sometimes you have people who commit suicide over a long period of time. They start in adolescence, and sometimes they end their lives by the 50s, 60s through drinking, doing drugs, and doing all kinds of negative things for themselves. So our spiritual states are dynamic. This is very important to remember. We are free because God did not create puppets. We are free to make mistakes. You can make mistakes. Sometimes, a good spirit will tell you in your ear, don't do this. But, you still want to do it. We are free to increase our difficulties. We are free to increase our suffering, to have vices, not to correct our shortcomings. We know we have shortcomings. For example, we may know that we have a tendency to violence, but we still are unable to control our behavior. I had a friend, for example, a long time ago, who was an alcoholic. He's a childhood friend. We grew up together in Rio. And he knew that if he went into a bar, he would not come out standing. He would not come out standing. So what he did is he crossed to the other side of the street when he saw a bar. So he became aware of the fact that, and he accepted that he was an alcoholic. So this first step that he took helped him then to find the strategies to avoid the very negative consequences of being an alcoholic. We are obviously free to increase our liabilities. We can make additional mistakes to the ones we made in previous lives. To refuse to help people, to atone. Sometimes a child is born within a family to give the parents the opportunity for atonement, to compensate the errors they made in the past. But some parents will still continue to make mistakes. Or the other way around. The child is born there to help the parents, to help them in their quest for betterment, for spiritual development. And sometimes, the child, when it grows up, it refuses to do that. And sometimes we forget the commitments we made before we became incarnate spirits. Because every time we are about to come into a material world, there is a plan, and we have to find ways to live that. And we almost always make commitments. It is very rare that an incarnation is imposed on a spirit. Normally, the superior spirits present you with a plan, and normally you agree. Do you agree to be a medium? Yes. So that is one of the commitments. And sometimes we forget because we are distracted by other things. And the objective of each period in life is to live with less luggage, to be lighter, to be more free. So the less things you have on your back, the freer you are, and the better you will be able to move. It's a story of a Buddhist monk and a backpacker. They were walking along a trail somewhere in Asia, and the backpacker all of a sudden noticed that the monk had nothing on it. He was carrying nothing. So he also, the backpacker, started to throw away some of the things that he didn't need. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, he was able to move as fast as the monk. So this is what we should try to do: have less luggage and to move more free. We can also, as I mentioned before, we can make additional mistakes. We have more liabilities, as you see here. You increase, you have a ball and chain behind you, and you can have more trials and atonements. But a trial or an atonement is not synonymous with sadness. You can be happy during trials and atonements because we are in a world what is naturally to be in the situation where there are trials and atonements, and you have to be happy within these periods. You can be happy within these periods as well. Let's talk about the lessons. God does not punish us for our mistakes, but there will, as I mentioned before, there will be compensations, there will be lessons, there will be treatments. But the common currency is always love. God is a loving Father. So He's not going to punish you. He's just going to teach you through love something that you need to learn. Lessons in love during the present incarnation, we have them all the time. We have every day the opportunity to love, every single day, every minute of the day, we have the opportunity to love someone, whether it's within our families or outside, on the street, in the office, at school. You have this opportunity to love people. But in order to love people, you have to go towards them. Some people are unable to do that for various reasons, and I'm not criticizing them. They're just because they are unable to go towards people. But we have, in the school, in this school of life, we are here to learn how to love. And life gives us this opportunity to love every day. And the periods of between incarnations as well, as spirits on the other side of the mirror, we will have opportunities to love, to help people, and to pardon people through love. Say what was wrong doing to us, what was done wrong to us with love. Always pay with love. In future incarnations as well. Let's talk about discovery of evolution. We expiate our mistakes by studying, by working, by suffering, but always with love as a basis. And love in action is charity. And we should always strive to be charitable. And we are talking here about moral charity, not just material charity, which is useful, obviously, for people who are hungry, for example, or are on the street. But love in action is charity. Charity is actions that do not demand any return. You don't want anything back. You just help because you love the other. We need to discover our conscience, because our consciences are pre-programmed. They are there already. All we need to do is to look for them and open them. And one of the ways, for example, that I do it is when I read a good book, a good Spiritist book, for example, the Gospel. If you read it from beginning to end, you're going to learn a lot. But if you start again a second time, every time you come to a particular chapter, you realize that what you learned the less time has increased. Or when you open it casually, any page at random, you will fall on a passage that you already read in the past, but all of a sudden you learn something new. So this is how we discover our consciences. And we need to change our interiors. We need to change who we are internally. 90% of what we are is not conscious. 90%. For example, a lot of the traumas that we have suffered, we have put away in the unconscious. We have forgotten about them, between brackets, but they're still there. Sometimes they're doing us a lot of harm. We have to evolve spiritually, and we have to get to a point where good behaviors become instinctive. We don't have to think about it. Oh, I have to be good. I have to be charitable. No, it just happens. It just happens. And this is where there are no shortcuts, really. You have to, first of all, know what your weaknesses are, work on them, but at the same time, you have to be always working with the good sentiments that would allow you then later on in life, or in another incarnation, or in another period outside of an incarnation, for good behaviors to become instinctive. The plan. Let's look at the work of a craftsman here. Here's a guitar builder, a luthier. For a good craftsman, there is knowledge, there is experience, and there is time. And this is how we have to work with ourselves, to study, to increase our knowledge, to reprogram our consciousness, to work for love, for God, for ourselves, for our neighbor, principally for our neighbor. Obviously, loving God is above everything else, but loving ourselves, or at least being a friend of ourselves, is very important, because you cannot love your neighbor as yourself if you hate yourself. As I mentioned before, sometimes we are our own worst enemies. So let us learn how to be at ease with ourselves. Let us learn how to love ourselves so that we can love our neighbor as we should. And when we say our neighbor, it doesn't mean the guy next door. It doesn't mean somebody in our immediate family. As my old father used to say, loving your family is nothing more than your obligation. But we need to go towards people that are, for example, different than us. They have a different sexual orientation. They have a different color. They have a different language. They are tall. They are short. They are overweight or underweight. That are old. That are young. We have to fight our prejudices to go towards our neighbor. And obviously, you have to work for Earth. We cannot continue to do what we have been doing for the last few centuries, which is destroying the house that we live in. And we have to be then respectful of what God gave us, which was a perfect world. And obviously the universe. Each one of us, in a very tiny, very, 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 very small way, we can contribute to the development of the universe. It's like the butterfly that flaps its wing in China. We feel it here in Brussels or in New York. There is a consequence to that. So we can work towards the betterment of the universe. Suffering. Suffer well. There is a way to suffer, because sometimes, we don't know how to suffer. We are going to suffer one day or another. But to suffer well, you have to be without hatred, without revolt, without despair, because all of these things are not going to help you in your suffering. And even when you are suffering, you can still love other people. You can still help other people. When you go, for example, for an extended period in a hospital, you almost know for sure that there are people there which are most likely worse off than you. There are also a lot of spirits wandering around, confused. Some are coming in, some are going out, some are lost. So you can always pray for them, for example, even if you are yourself suffering. We have to accept our suffering and learn our lessons. And obviously, we have to expand our capacity to love. I've talked a lot about love, and I will talk until the end. One of the objectives of the incarnate life is to expand this capacity to love, because we are supposed, for example, to pardon people without any memories. We have to pardon people on the absence of memories. So we are not influenced by what we did to them in the past or what they did to us. But we still have to find this capacity to love them, this compassion towards them. For example, if they were our enemies in the past. We have to detach ourselves from matter, from things, from stuff. Detach ourselves from the means. God gave us a lot of means on an incarnation. But the means are not the objectives. Our cars, our houses are not the objective of our incarnations. They're just a means. And the means of for what? For spiritual development. This is why we are here. This is why we have these means. And we have to understand also the lessons that we see from our bodies, because the body is a great teacher. It will teach you a lot of things like patience, like humbleness, and so on. And obviously, we have to give more importance to spiritual life. We are here to develop our spiritual life and not our material life. We have to seek balance, seek moderation of desires, of defects, of passions. Unbalance, passion is a neutral sentiment. But if it's unbalanced, if it dominates your life, this is all you want to do, it's all encompassing, then it's negative for you. And we have to correct our defects as well as we can, and correct our vices if we have any. We have to accept our spiritual states, as I mentioned before. Is one of the most important points we need to have we need to achieve in a particular incarnation, is to accept who we are. Whatever God gave us, whatever body God gave us, whatever intelligence He gave us, we have to accept that. Work on what we can change. For example, your intellectual level, your schooling, work on that. But there are things that you cannot change. And we should not waste our time trying to do that. Accept the means that we receive then from God. The future, true future happiness, and look out for God's messengers, will not be material. It will be spiritual. It will be eternal. And I put these two men here just to indicate that sometimes God sends us some messengers, and sometimes we ignore them, but they are there. I've done this several times anyway, so this is why I put them there. And sometimes they're very simple people, and because we have many prejudices, we fail to see that these people are there to help us. And the future happiness will be absolute. The future in the divine world. The road is long and tortuous, so there will be ups and downs, there will be curves and so on. It will be difficult. Happiness is a function of the development of the spirit. Happiness does not accept ignorance, hatred, revolt, envy, jealousy, vices. And when I say ignorance, is willful ignorance. We want to stay ignorant. And you keep hatred, because sometimes we know we are hating somebody, but we like it to have it in our hearts. But the heart has only a certain size. If it's full of hatred, there is no space for love. We must not seek happiness. We will be discovered by happiness, as granted by God as a transformation of our souls. We will be transformed into happy people. We must be happy with the good that we do, be guided by love, guided by faith. Put some water in our wine. When I say this, is that sometimes we have very strong positions on things, and sometimes we have to compromise certain principles or certain angers, but it doesn't mean that you have to forget about the real principles, for example, taught by Jesus. No, but you have to be less inflexible. And happiness is a function of our development, spiritual and morally. The final words, actually. The keys for spiritual development through happiness are to accept the trials and atonements on earth and in the spiritual dimension. Love your neighbor. To learn how to forgive. Extremely important, very difficult to forgive. Principally, forgiving people who have done us a lot of harm. To detach ourselves from matter. We are not here to acquire things, to acquire more things, acquire stuff. We are here to use whatever matter is there to develop ourselves, to accept our bodies as they are, accept each phase in our lives, learning its essence, its lessons. One important point is that the body always has the right age, always has the right age. It will evolve as you age physically, but it always has. It is a very, very strict and tough teacher, as I mentioned before, but it always has the right age. Don't try to be 20 when you're 60 or 75 or 80. You are your age. Live with it. To place our neighbor at the center of our life. And as I said, neighbor is a very broad concept. Human beings at the center of our lives. Put God at the center of our lives. And the most important concept, if you don't remember anything of what I said today, is that try to become charity. Try to be that person that would help other people without asking for anything in return. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and a joy.
Thank you, Joaquim, for these wonderful reflections. There's certainly a lot to talk about. So please stay tuned for the Q&A session. But first, there are some announcements. First, Introduction to Mediumship, a free virtual course for beginners. The U.S. Spiritist Federation is thrilled to invite individuals eager to explore the realm of spirit communication according to Spiritism. Check out the new course at learn.spiritist.us or scan the QR code on the flyer. Second, please join us for the 18th U.S. Spiritist Symposium. It will be held on Saturday, September 21st of 2024 in Boston. The theme is Life Through the Lens of Immortality, Philosophy of Spiritism. Third announcement. Please check out the podcast-like series Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life based on the works by Joanna De Angelis. A new episode appears every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, available on YouTube and Spotify. And the Spiritist app, Be My Hope, is available now on the App Store or Google Play. This app offers uplifting content in a collection of videos, daily messages, and audio materials. Download it now. And finally, on the screen, please note there is a QR code. If you want to help the USSF produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, please scan the QR code on screen for your donation. Okay, so we'll now begin our question and answer session, and let's see what we have here. From the U.S. Spiritist Federation, how can Spiritism help us learn to cope with despair in which we feel the struggles we are facing right now will never end?
Yes, this is a very complex question. Sometimes when we are facing with a difficult journey or difficult period in a journey, and it seems that it's endless, and we can despair, but we can be sad, we can be walking as if there is no hope. But Spiritism gives us that hope because it tells us that you can be happy through periods of sadness, that there is an absolute happiness at the end of our travels through the various incarnations and periods in the spiritual dimension. But even within a particular incarnation, we can try, first of all, to look at what makes us so sad. What makes us despair. And sometimes, when you look at these factors, you see that there are actually three pillars which are very important. The first one is biology. You were born sometimes with a certain propensity to do certain things. Propensity, for example, to be depressed. I have met many people who are bipolar, for example. Science can help them, Spiritism can help them, but it is a struggle. It is a struggle. So that is the first thing. The second one is that there is the psychological dimension. In psychological dimension, you can work on it yourself, or you can work with a professional, a psychiatrist, a psychologist that will help you find what are the triggers of your sadness, what are the triggers that make you so angry. I'll give you an example. I used to, one day I was driving here in Brussels, a very quiet town, and several years ago, and I had a very big car, and my car, 5 meters in front of me, 5 meters to the left, 5 meters to the right, 5 meters to the back, were my personal property. Any person, particularly male person, who crossed that place, I used to get very angry. And one day, a couple of young people entered into my private space very, very quickly. And I got so angry that I chased them and I stopped them and got out of my car, was ready to fight. And all of a sudden, a good spirit told me in my ear, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Where's this anger coming from?" So I said, "Well, okay, sorry, my mistake, my bad." And I walked away. And I then said, "Well, I cannot go on with this anger. I need to find some help." So I went to find some help with a psychiatrist, with a psychoanalyst, which used a particular technique from Jung that helped me a lot. But I also worked on myself as well, try to do that internal journey that I mentioned to you before. Recognizing what are your triggers. Are you a violent guy or a guy who needs to be controlled because otherwise you'll do something wrong? Well, I finally came to the conclusion that I have to be very careful with my temper. Okay? Why I have this temper? Well, many things. My education, some of the traumas I had while I was in the U.S. Army, and so on. So many, many things. But I had to learn how to control them. And the third pillar, which I was mentioning about, is the spiritual pillar. Sometimes spiritists think that everything is spiritual. No, there are the other two pillars as well. But you can be under the influence, for example, of a spirit that vibrates with you, that uses your weaknesses to manipulate you. So if you know what your weaknesses are already, that will help you to defend yourself against this type of manipulation. If, for example, you have a vice, you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, and you go into a bar or you go into a shooting gallery, well, there are spirits there also who love that, and they're going to act on you so that they get this imaginary pleasure. So you have, first of all, to try to analyze who you are. Read a lot of spiritist books, and also ask for professional help if it's available to you. And also, one tiny little point. Also, you can go to a spiritist center if you can find one near you, and they have a lot of programs to help people who are in despair.
Thank you. In a way, it's almost a blessing and a curse at the same time. But I feel like one thing Spiritism can do for us is it reminds us all the time of what we need to work on within ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, next This is from Yasko Arcava. Hi, Yasko. Hi, Joaquim. Great topic and material. I think we have to practice and learn how to, quote, reconcile with our adversaries while walking with them, otherwise, end quote, as devised by Jesus. How to start it while we are still struggling with our conditions in this planet of trials and expiations.
Yes. Well, the first thing, well, it's very difficult to do what you were asking here. How can you pardon, for example, somebody who did you wrong? Most of us live in very competitive societies. I was raised always to be the first in class. Second was not good enough. Had to be number one. So that brought a lot of weight on me. But also, I looked at everybody around me. I looked at them as competitors, and most of the time, I didn't want to cooperate with them because they could be number one in my place. So the most important thing that we have to try to do is to bring love within ourselves and use this love for others to minimize the conditions in which we live. If you, for example, even in your office, instead of trying to be number one all the time, instead of trying to beat people all the time, for people who work for you, instead of to be on top of them, try to be generous. You'll be surprised at the power of generosity, even in a professional environment. At first, people don't understand what you are doing, but it really works tremendously. At the same time, we know that we need to cooperate, as you mentioned, we need to cooperate sometimes with people who are our adversaries. But an adversary is not necessarily your enemy. It's just an adversary. We look sometimes at adversaries, at people that we have to slay. Sometimes you have also to try to at least understand what is motivating the other guy. Sometimes he has a wrong image of who you are, and you have a wrong image of what he is or she is. So I think dialogue is very important. Also, lowering your level of aggressiveness is very, very helpful, but also going towards other people. You'll be rejected, you'll be betrayed, between brackets, by people. Okay, but Jesus was betrayed many, many, many times, even by his disciples. But he continued, he persevered, and continued to try to help us, even if we rejected them. So persevere is very important, and help people. Try to be that person who everybody comes to for help. I knew somebody in Brazil, for example. Her house was like Grand Central Station in New York. You had children coming in, dogs coming in, people off the street, neighbors, everybody was there. So because they knew that they could get some kind of consolation, some kind of help. Not material help, but just an ear, something like that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, these are very good, important points. All right, next question. From the International Spiritist Council. Can you explain how the consequences we face are opportunities for learning and or re-education?
Yes. If you recall, in this presentation, I presented a picture of a schoolroom. Okay. So if you imagine that the earth is a big schoolroom, okay, big schoolroom, and there's a teacher, Jesus, for example, is there behind, and within that schoolroom, we have every day possibilities to learn, possibilities to help people. If we are here to love people, well, let's start loving right away. If you are confronted with an old enemy, pay whatever he gave you whatever trauma he gave you, pay him with love. And you will see that you will unburden yourself. And that's the opportunity that you should not miss. For example, in every family, the family is not there by chance. Every family is a school of love, okay? Now, but if you, for any number of reasons, decide that it's not the focus of your life because you are preoccupied with your paycheck, or you're preoccupied with your career, or you're traveling all over the place, well, then you're missing a lot of opportunities to love, a lot of opportunities to learn. You can also learn from negative things that happen to you. One friend of mine, a long time ago, he had a near-death experience where, he died for a few seconds. And he told me that when he got down there, the guy said, well, it's not here, go up. And then we went up, the guy's dad said, well, it's not your time yet, so go back to Earth, learn some more, okay? So in that particular situation, this friend of mine was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And his day was divided into 3 phases: before family arrived, when family was there, and after family left. So he realized then that his family was the center of his life, one of the centers of his life, which were not, they were not in the past, because he was preoccupied with his career. So he learned something. So let us learn from the difficulties that we have. That awful boss that you have at work, that terrible person, the least he's doing to you is to teach you how to deal with the next one coming along, okay? Which you'll be able to deal better because you had this guy first. So this is what we should try to do. Look at every adversity as an opportunity to develop ourselves, to improve ourselves, and to go forward.
Thank you. That's a fascinating example about the near-death experience that your friend had. Okay, this one's from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. What is the relationship between happiness and forgiveness? You did touch on forgiveness.
Yeah, well, when you have some kind of unresolved relationship with someone because of a trauma, because of something that you did to someone in the past, or that person did to you, that situation has to be resolved at some point in time. It will be resolved at some point in time, in the time of God, either in this incarnation or in a future incarnation or in the spiritual plane. But each time you have a negative feeling towards someone who did you some wrong, you're basically carrying a burden on your back that is not helping you to move forward, that is slowing you down. So if you want to move faster, do like that guy that was walking with the Buddhist monk. Forgive and take out some of the burden from your back. And it is very difficult sometimes to forgive, very, very difficult. And I certainly had my struggles with that. And I mentioned one of them with my father. But sometimes it takes a strategy. Sometimes it takes several years for you to arrive at that point where you are able to truly forgive. Because if you don't, you cannot say, oh, tomorrow I forgive. No, it has to come from within you. So in order to do that, sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes a whole incarnation and beyond. But it is very important to do it. One of the things I did, very practical, very simple and simplistic, was to make a list of all the people that I had issues with, from the lowest to the highest, and started working on the lighter ones, trying to forgive all of these little things, all of the, because I was very highly sensitive at some point in time. And I tried, forgive this guy, forgive that person, and so on and so forth. And finally, I was able to concentrate on the big ones, but obviously, it's a process that takes time because, as I mentioned before, because you have to reprogram yourself. Sometimes you think you're the victim, but in fact, you may be the on the contrary, you may be the butcher, the guy that caused the problem to begin with. So sometimes you have to reprogram yourself where you stand in this equation. But it's important to continue to persevere, to continue to know yourself, and to see that forgiving is something that you should do not only for the other person, but for yourself. One of the things that stop people from forgiving is because they have too much pride. If you ask for forgiveness for somebody and that person said, go away, all I can tell you is that your situation has not changed. You did not have a good relationship with him before or with her before, so you still don't have a good relationship. But it doesn't touch you anymore. You have done what you could. Sometimes that's all you can do.
Okay, thank you. These are very good, important points. Okay, I believe this will be our last question. From the U.S. Spiritist Federation, there are times when free will requires a lot of courage. Is this true? If so, how? How can this affect happiness?
Yes. Well, free will is obviously a philosophical abstract concept, but free will means that you act coherently. If you have learned, if you adopted certain principles, you have to act in accordance with them. And sometimes you are confronted in the real world with situations where there's a challenge to your core beliefs. Now, if it's a core belief, a real core belief, then you have to act according to what you believe, whether it hurts people or not, whether your entourage likes it or not. This is being coherent. And I remember a few years ago, there was a terrorist attack in Oklahoma City where a federal building was destroyed and many people died. And one person was apprehended and convicted and sentenced to death. And the state of Oklahoma, in conjunction with the federal government, because it was a federal case, allowed the families to observe the execution of Timothy McVeigh, which was the terrorist. And most of them said, yes, I will do that. I will be there, sitting there, seeing this guy die. But one of them, who had lost a child and a grandson, said, no, I would not do that. I have forgiven him. I'm sure it was very painful for him to do that, but he acted according to his beliefs. And this is what we should do, act according to our beliefs. If the belief is not well-grounded, then you will find excuses not to follow it. But if it's well-grounded, then you will be happy with your decision. Sometimes, probably, there is, for lack of a better term, because it's overused, collateral damage. There can be, obviously, but you have to persevere with what you believe.
Thank you, Joaquim.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everyone who has participated in the Spiritism Talk series. Next Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, don't miss our next live when Regeni Planner will be discussing challenging science, the transport phenomenon. Joaquim, before we close, can you please do a prayer for us?
Yes, it'll be my pleasure. Let us try together to find silence within ourselves, a silence that is spiritual, a silence that allows us to be in a calm, relaxed, and peaceful state, a silence that is independent of the noises around us. It is a spiritual silence. And this silence would allow us slowly to get in touch with our spiritual self, with our spiritual essence. And here, in this temple of love, of calm and quietness, of hope, we can feel the vibrations coming from all over the universe, good vibrations of love, of hope, of compassion. And we can then send our thanks, our love to all those spirits which are together with us today, whether they are incarnate or disincarnate. Let us also send as much love as we can to all of our brothers, sisters, who are suffering throughout this world. Those that are suffering in wars, those that are suffering running from revolutions, running from hunger, running from oppression, running from pain. Those that are with their families on the oceans, trying to find a better day for their children. Let us also send our love to these people, to these incarnate people, so that they can still keep hope in their hearts, so that despite their trials, they will not fall prey to anger, fall prey to despair, fall prey to hate. Let us also think of our spiritual brothers who are suffering on the other side, on the spiritual dimension. Let us send them a lot of love, a lot of hope, so that they can move towards the light, so that they can accept the lessons that are being given to them. Let us also thank Jesus for all the beautiful things that he sent us, all of the thoughts, all of the principles that allows us to navigate oceans of anger, of despair, and that lead us towards a better day, a better planet, the divine world. And finally, let us ask our Lord, he who gave us spiritual life that is eternal, he who gave us the privilege of incarnation, let us ask him to bless us, bless our families, bless our countries, bless the whole earth, and give us his permission to end our talks today.